Listen, right, if you're going to be a killer, then you need to be able to cover your tracks. You need to be able to cover things up so that nobody finds the evidence, which I don't think is going to happen in today's Mr Ballen video, as it's called Bloody Clues Found All Over This Small Canadian Town. Let's see who's been stupid, and let's see what Mr Ballen does to that like button once I put my headphones in.
In January of 1988, the clerk of a sporting goods store in a small town in Canada looked up right as a man walked into a shop.
Right.
Now, it was below freezing outside, but this man wasn't wearing a coat. He was just wearing sneakers, ripped pants, and a thin plastic rain poncho.
Oh, really?
This man quickly walked down the aisle and grabbed
it?
a pair of ski pants, and then he walked up, he paid for the pants in cash, and then very quickly hurried out of the store. But after this sort of strangely dressed man left, the clerk turned on the radio, and he heard a breaking news report about a murder right up the road. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload 2, 3, even 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please secretly steal the like button's phone and delete all of their music playlists. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications.
That doesn't happen anymore, Mr Ballen. You know, Spotify saves it and everything, doesn't it? But it's okay. It's not 1990 anymore.
So you don't miss any of our weekly uploads.
Right, let's go.
Okay, let's get into today's story.
The Cheapskate. It's called The Cheapskate.
On the night of January 11th, 1988, a 62-year-old man named Wilfred Goodreau ate a bowl of hot soup at his kitchen table in Kapuskasing, which was a tiny lumber town in northern Ontario, Canada.
Okay.
His 53-year-old girlfriend, Boucher, was sitting across from him,
Is that not
and
Agatha?
she was visibly shivering because it was freezing cold inside of their house.
Right.
Now, Wilfred knew Agatha probably wanted him to turn up the heat, but he absolutely was not going to do that, because as it was, their electric bill was already too high.
Okay.
So Wilfred really hated spending money, but not because he didn't have any. Back when he was a kid, his family had been really, really poor, and so he'd picked up some really frugal habits that had just sort of stuck with him.
Yeah,
so
like hoarding things and making things last longer than they should.
Even now that he had a steady income as a mechanic and pretty comfortable savings, he still always tried to spend as little as possible.
Yeah.
Plus, he wanted to retire soon, and he was supporting Agatha too. So as he sat there watching Agatha continue to shiver...
I mean, there's this fine line between careful and being tight, isn't there? Or cheapskate. Do you know what I mean? You can argue over 10 pence over a can of something, and then that's being a little bit finicky. Or there's like spending too much money than you're earning. Then that's different, isn't it? You know what I mean? Clearly
trying to signal to him, like, come on, turn up the heat. Wilfred finally did get up, but not to turn up the heat. Instead, he walked over to the living room and he grabbed a shawl off the couch and he brought it back and he handed it to
Scruff.
Then, as Agatha kind of scowled...
What's the point in having the heating in the house or the wood on the fire or whatever the situation is here if you're never ever going to use it? What are you going to do? Use it as an ornament? I mean, come on, you've got to at least use the heating sometimes.
With him, Wilfred just sat back down and continued eating his soup. Early the next morning, around 7:15 a.m., Wilfred woke up to an empty bed and the familiar sound of Agatha bustling around in the kitchen, making breakfast and packing his lunch for work.
Right.
And then a few minutes later, he felt the blanket shift as Agatha crawled back into bed beside him. So Wilfred and Agatha had been together about 12 years, and these days they lived a pretty quiet life, which was pretty easy to do in Kapuskasing, which was the kind of place where really nothing ever happened. And it's also where pretty much everybody knew everyone and where people didn't even bother locking their doors at night. And that suited Wilfred just fine.
Yeah.
Because at one point,
it is 1988, and back in them days, people could leave the doors open and you wouldn't get robbed. Nowadays, Jesus Christ, you need to have your house like Fort Knox.
Life had been anything but quiet. His relationship with Agatha had actually begun with a huge, dramatic scandal. That scandal had cost Wilfred his marriage, most of his family, and a lot of his self-respect. So at this point, a simple life with Agatha was exactly what he wanted. Now, Wilfred lay in his bed just for a bit longer, listening to the wind howl outside and, feeling Agatha next to him. But eventually, he got up and he headed down the hallway in just his underwear. The sun was not up yet, so the house was completely dark, but he made his way to the bathroom by memory, and when he got there, he flipped on the light. He closed the door and then walked over to the sink and he turned on the tap, and he had just begun shaving when he heard the door behind him creak open. Now, Wilfred instinctively figured it was Agathe coming in to use the bathroom. Then he turned around and saw who was actually standing in the doorway.
Oh.
At the same time this was happening in the bathroom, Wilfred and Agathe's neighbor, Suzanne Gravel, was in her kitchen next door when she heard these loud crashes and shouting coming from Agathe and Wilfred's house.
Right.
She ran to the window to look out, but it was too dark to see anything. It sounded like Agathe was screaming Wilfred's name over and over again. And so, assuming there had to be some sort of emergency, Suzanne grabbed her coat and just ran outside to see what was going on.
Instead of phoning police.
But she'd only gone a few steps out her front door when she looked over and saw the door to Wilfred and Agathe's house swing open, and a man stepped out. And this man was definitely not Wilfred. He was short and stocky and looked like he was maybe in his early 30s. And as he stepped down off the stoop, he turned and made eye contact with Suzanne, who immediately froze. Her heart was racing out of control, and she knew she was now in danger. But she didn't panic. She just turned and walked over to her car, she got in, and then locked the doors. And then she just sat there and waited. Now, the whole time that she did that she was just sitting in her...
if he's got a gun or something, what's your car going to do? I'd have drove off, to be honest.
her car waiting, this short, stocky, mid-30-something man actually just continued to stand there in front of Wilfred and Agathe's house, and he was just staring at her in the car.
Oh, shit.
But after a little while, he turned and walked over to the curb, and he climbed into a blue pickup truck, and he drove off without even turning on his headlights. The second he was gone, Suzanne rushed out of her car and ran back into her own house. And once she was inside, she immediately grabbed her home phone and she tried calling Wilfred and Agathe's number for their house next door. But the line just kept on ringing, nobody answered, so she eventually hung up and then she called the police.
Should have been first.
A dispatcher picked up her call, and just as Suzanne began describing what was going on, Suzanne, at her house, she heard this loud banging coming from her front door. Immediately, Suzanne thought that the short, stocky guy who drove off had come back for her, and so she was terrified. But then she heard Agathe calling her name from outside, so clearly it was her banging on the door.
Right.
And so Suzanne, she drops the phone, she runs over to the door, opens it up, and there was Agathe, who had no coat on, and she looked equally terrified here. Suzanne grabbed Agathe, she pulled her inside, she slammed the door, locked it behind her, and then she looked at Agathe like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And Agathe, she's out of breath, she's clearly panicking here, but eventually she calms down and she looks at Suzanne and she says, something terrible has happened to Wilfred. About 20 minutes later, a constable with the Ontario Provincial Police drew his revolver and pushed open the front door of Wilfred and Agathe's house. He was here because the police had just been told that a violent assault had just apparently occurred in this house. And so this officer was here to check it out. And so this officer, as soon as the door was open, he shouted inside that if anybody was in there to come out with their hands up. And then when there was no response, he stepped through the doorway. As the officer went room by room, making sure nobody was in the house, he noticed that it was very quiet and very clean, like the house was immaculate. Nothing was out of place. It didn't look like anything had even happened in here. Until he got to the bathroom. When he looked in there, all he saw was blood. It was on the walls, it was on the floor, it was everywhere, on the toothbrushes, the toilet paper. I mean, the whole room was splattered in blood.
Yeah, it's got to be a
Most
shotgun,
of the blood had pooled around the body of a man who was lying on the bathroom floor. The man was just wearing underwear, and he was lying on his back, and there was shaving cream on half of his face. And he was covered in...
What a way to go, man. Shaving cream on half your face and you get killed. I mean, blood everywhere. It's got to have been some sort of shotgun, hasn't it? And this guy standing in the garden and staring at Agatha, as I'm going to call her, because that's how it's spelt. Maybe he's been watching too many Halloween movies to be stood there staring at her for like 10 minutes before getting in his truck. Maybe he models himself on Michael. Mine can't do. I don't even know if it's a shotgun yet. I was going to say because he'd use a machete or a knife or something, but we don't know yet because he's not told us what he's been killed with.
At least a dozen stab wounds on his neck, on his chest, and on his arms.
Now,
the constable knew there was virtually no chance this man was still alive,
wannabe.
But he obviously had to be sure. So he stepped into the bathroom, he crouched down next to the body, and he felt for a pulse. But there wasn't one.
No.
The body was still warm though. So the constable pulled out his radio and he called it in. And he also asked for instructions because Kappa's casing did not see a lot of homicides. And the constable literally didn't know what he was supposed to do next.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, do you think there's some sort of motive here? I just think like a vendetta or something. Maybe something he's done years ago. I mean, why has he left Agatha alive? I can't say her name. Agatha. Whatever. Need Agatha Christie.
A few hours later, so around noon on January 12th, 1988, Detective Wayne Frichette of the Ontario Provincial Police stepped off a plane at an airstrip near Kappa's Casing, where he'd just been made lead detective on a murder case. This town was so small that the local police didn't have anyone who'd worked a homicide before.
Right.
So Frichette had been flown in from Toronto to run this investigation because he did have homicide experience. He'd been briefed on the flight and already had a good sense of the case. So Wilfred Goodreau, the victim, was a 62-year-old mechanic, and he had been stabbed to death in his bathroom that morning. And right afterwards, a neighbor had apparently seen this short, stocky Caucasian man in his mid-30s walk out of Wilfred's house and drive away in a blue pickup truck. So, assuming that man that was seen leaving the house was the killer, it seemed like he already had a pretty big head start here because he had a decent description of the number one suspect, potentially the killer. He was also confident this had not been part of a robbery or just some random attack. Because the first responders hadn't found any signs of a break-in or robbery. And the house had been basically spotless aside from the bathroom where pretty clearly the murder had taken place.
It's one of two things then, isn't it? Right? The killer could be related. Had a key to get in the house, to open the door, no signs of a break-in, blah, blah, blah. And he's been killed by a family member or, something to do with that. Or Mr Ballen did sow that seed before where he said that everyone leaves the doors open all the time. So maybe Wilfred just left the door open because people do that at that time in that era. I'm sitting there thinking who it could be.
So Frichette, he couldn't possibly know if that guy who left the house, if that really was the killer or not. However, there was one person he could turn to right now who could really help him figure out if this person could have been involved. Because she'd actually been inside the house when Wilfred was being murdered, and so very likely at least saw or maybe even knew that man that was seen exiting the house. Later that afternoon, Frichette sat in an interview room at the local police station listening to Wilfred's girlfriend, Agathe, walk him through her morning. Now, according to Agathe, she hadn't actually seen the attack. She hadn't seen the potential killer, none of it, because when she heard this commotion in the house, she had just sort of instinctively jumped into a closet and hid.
She was so sick of him being tighter than cramp that she hired somebody to kill him. This is my theory. Because she just wants to put the heating on and be warm. And now she's playing daft that she didn't see the guy, even though the guy that Wilfred was stabbed multiple times and screaming out whatever. Because you don't get stabbed and not make a noise until you're actually dead. So you're going to scream for the bit, aren't you? So she didn't see him in all that time. It sounds like the attack was for at least a minute. Do you know what I mean? From what Mr Ballen's saying, anyway. Got to overpower him as well, hasn't he? As well as stab him. So, right, okay. Okay, interesting. That's a theory. I reckon Agatha's paid someone, and that's why she's saying he didn't see him and don't know what he looks like, blah, 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 blah.
In the house, she had just sort of instinctively jumped into a closet and hid. And she had stayed there until she heard the sound of whoever this was leaving and driving off. Now, Frichette was not totally alarmed by this story. I mean, people get scared and they protect themselves. But what did stand out to Frichette as Agathe told him this story was that she didn't cry once the whole time she was talking. In fact, she came off as almost weirdly calm. Now, Frichette knew from experience this could definitely just be, a product of shock.
Red flag.
But it also could be that she just wasn't that upset. So at some point, Frichette asked Agathe about her relationship with Wilfred. And she told him that by and large, they'd been really happy together. They'd hardly ever argued, and when they did, it was just about Wilfred being cheap. Because, as Agathe went on to explain, Wilfred would go to crazy lengths to save money, even just a few cents, even though he had plenty of money saved up. She said Wilfred would even watch the—
Have I predicted this story? I feel like I've got it already. You know, when you watch so many Mr Ballen videos and they shock you and you think, oh my God, I didn't see that one coming, and you theorise going through it, what's happened. I think I've got this one. And what are we at? 30, well, call it 12 minutes in, I think I've got this one.
even though he had plenty of money saved up. She said Wilfred would even watch the TV with the lights off just to save money on electricity.
Can't be doing with
He
that,
also
mate.
insisted on reusing bathwater for the same reason.
Oh my God, Jesus Christ. Oh my God, divorce him. Just divorce him and leave. Do you know what I mean? At this moment in time, I have a light on there, a strip light here. I've got my lights on. The only thing I've not got on is my don't quit one because I forgot to plug it in. But that's not because I don't like, I've got a fan on as well. If you need the stuff, just leave it on or use it. Use the stuff, you've got it. Don't be fucking tight.
And then when he and Agathe traveled, he made them sleep in the car rather than paying for a hotel. So Frichette, after listening to this, he felt like he was getting a picture of a guy in Wilfred who had strong opinions and really not a lot of flexibility. It did make Frichette wonder if maybe because of this personality type that he appeared to have, Wilfred, it's entirely possible he could have made some enemies along the way in his life. And when he asked Agathe about that, when he asked her, did Wilfred have any enemies? Frichette immediately saw Agathe's expression change. She went from being sort of weirdly calm to looking almost apprehensive. And she looked down at the table for a moment and then back up at Frichette. And then she just said, that she didn't want to point fingers here, but there was some history that he needed to know.
Go on,
she told Frichette that before Wilfred was dating her, Agathe, Wilfred had actually been married for 20 years to Agathe's own sister, Rachel Boucher. Agathe said,
this is some Jeremy Kyle stuff. I'm saying that, Jeremy Kyle. If you're American, probably the best analogy for the Jeremy Kyle show is Jerry Springer. This is some Jerry Springer shit for you Americans. This is some Jeremy Kyle shit for you English people who watched Jeremy Kyle when he was airing. I mean, it was with Agatha's sister first, then with Agathe. That's got to have hurt or stung at some point. Jesus Christ. No way. Not having it. Oh, Dirty Wilfred's been dipping in the same pond.
to Agathe's own sister,
no way.
Rachel Boucher. Agathe said that she and Wilfred had had an affair. And when her sister Rachel found out about it, it became a huge scandal that really tore the whole family apart.
No. So it wasn't even like he got with him afterwards, like on a different timeline. He actually cheated on Rachel with her own sister, then ended up with her. Right, now we see motive. I might have got this a little bit wrong. I don't think it might be Agatha. I think it might be Rachel. Sending her boyfriend round. No, the guy was in his 30s. Maybe Rachel's son. If she's got one.
Rachel had divorced Wilfred pretty much right away.
Facts.
And she was still very angry about it. Even now, 12 years later. This was a deep cut. And according to Agathe, Wilfred's son, Paul, had taken the whole thing really hard too. And he'd barely spoken to Wilfred since the divorce. Until recently. This past Christmas, Agathe said Paul had come to Kapuskasing for a visit. It had been a pretty awkward couple of days, but she said that Paul and Wilfred had actually really bonded in the end.
Yeah.
And Paul seemed to have, basically forgiven his father. Frichette wrote all this down, but he wondered how sincere Paul's forgiveness really was.
Because he's going to be like plotting, let's get back in, let's get him comfortable, and I'm going to go and stove him in. Let's get a key to the house. Pretend that I'm going to be his friend again. Or a family member, or talk in terms, whatever you want to say. and then he's going to come in and he's going to kill him. I'm probably wrong again.
It was definitely suspicious timing. And on top of that, Paul was also in his early 30s, which was the exact age range as the suspected killer, that guy who walked out of the house that was seen by the neighbor. And so now Frichette really wanted to speak to Paul and also Wilfred's ex-wife Rachel as soon as possible. But just as he was wrapping up the interview with Agathe, an officer poked their head into the room and said they had just found something that Frichette needed to see right away. A half hour later, Frichette stood by the side of the road just a few miles from Wilfred's house, looking down at a pair of bloody winter boots lying in the snow.
Right.
And then behind Frichette, a little ways up the road, was a team of police officers who were working over this blue pickup truck that they had found abandoned behind a paper mill.
Okay.
These two clues, the boots and the truck, were actually just the latest in a trail of breadcrumbs that the killer had apparently left behind. Because all day long, various reports had been coming in about this mysterious man who matched the killer's description. Around 8:30 a.m. that morning, so about an hour after the murder, this mystery man had been spotted in downtown Kapuskasing wearing a rain poncho, ripped pants, and no coat. He'd gone to a few different stores, buying boots, a jacket, and ski pants, and he paid for everything in cash. Then, around noon...
Yeah, you pay things in cash, then there's no paper trail. Well, I say no paper trail, there's no bank trail, is there?
A police roadblock had stopped a taxi on its way out of town. The taxi's passenger, who was a short, stocky man, apparently in his 30s, had seemed really jumpy. So the officers had checked his ID and recorded his name before letting him through.
Paul.
Just then, Frichette's radio crackled and he answered it. And dispatch told him that they had just finished running the plates on that abandoned blue pickup truck, and they had traced it to a man from Timmins, which is a town about 2 hours south. The man's name was Richard Boucher, and it just so happened that that was the same name as the jumpy taxi passenger who'd been stopped by the police roadblock.
Okay, so it's not Paul.
2 days later, on January 14th, 1988, Detective Frichette sat at a desk in the Kapuskasing police station reading the file on Richard Boucher, who was currently on the run from police as the #1 suspect in the murder of Wilfred Goodreau.
Okay.
And Richard's file only made Frichette feel more certain that he was his guy. First of all, Richard was a Caucasian 33-year-old man, sort of fit the physical description, and he was also a cocaine dealer with a side hustle of providing strippers to local bars and hotels. And also, he'd previously been arrested for drug trafficking. However, there was one glaring problem. And that was that so far, Frichette just could not find any connection between Richard and Wilfred. Like, if Richard was the killer, why? How? Like, how in the world could these two guys be connected? The two men lived hours away from each other. They didn't seem to share any friends or business connections or really any mutual people at all.
But people can be paid. Doesn't matter if you know them. People can be paid.
So to Frichette, it sort of left
in cash that he may have used to buy shoes and stuff. Cash transaction. No trail.
Business connections or really any mutual people at all. So to Frichette, it sort of left two possibilities. Either they were linked by someone or something that maybe Wilfred had kept secret, or someone else had hired Richard to kill Wilfred. So now, while the local police focused on just finding Richard, Frichette was trying to figure out who in Wilfred's circle might have wanted Wilfred dead. By this point, Frichette had already questioned Wilfred's ex-wife Rachel, and she definitely did seem very bitter about the divorce. But she said that she actually really didn't keep up much with Wilfred these days, and that she couldn't even begin to guess who might have killed him. Because according to her, Wilfred was like the most boring man on earth, and she had no idea who would want to...
Oh, why was you upset that he fucked off with your sister? Man, because he went off with your sister, probably. I mean, I say why we upset that she went off with somebody behind your back, but I suppose, I mean, it's because it's in the family, isn't it? I suppose.
Do this to him. Frichette thought this was actually kind of an odd thing to say about your ex-husband who slept with your sister.
He's boring, he's tight, and he's my sister.
Actually, kind of an odd thing.
Wilf's kind of like a hero to all those stud guys out there, really, isn't he? Let's face it. He's done everything that's taboo. that's out of bounds, that you can't, that's morally wrong. He's done it.
To say about your ex-husband who slept with your sister. However, Rachel was not the only person on Frichette's list that had a grudge against Wilfred.
Paul.
Because Wilfred's adult son, Paul, had been so mad at Wilfred, he'd basically barely spoken to his father in the past decade. Except for just this past Christmas, when Paul had visited Wilfred and stayed at his house. And that visit had taken place just 3 weeks before Wilfred was murdered, which struck Frichette as awfully convenient timing for Paul to have had this sudden change of heart. And Paul's visit would have given Paul the chance to learn the layout of Wilfred's house. He would have seen Wilfred's routine, how he moved around, and when Wilfred was alone. All information a killer would need to know before attempting to kill someone.
But now, saying that, when you do go into the house to kill this man, you've got to know that he's in the bathroom. You know what I mean? I mean, you could have gone in and killed Agatha by accident and stabbed her in the bed.
Paul did not live in the area, so Frichette had actually scheduled a call with him for that afternoon to talk all this through. And when Frichette glanced at his watch, he actually saw it was time. So he picked up the phone and he dialed Paul's number. When Paul answered, right away Frichette noticed that his voice was a little bit shaky. And also, pretty much immediately, Paul said, unprompted, that he very likely didn't have anything useful to say because he hadn't been close to his dad in years. So Frichette just asked him about his recent visit to see his dad this past Christmas. And Paul would confirm that yes, that visit had happened, but he said that despite it being a good visit, for the two of them, he claimed he couldn't really remember anything that they'd even talked about. Like it was all just kind of a blur.
Yeah,
Frichette did not believe this for a second. No. I mean, theoretically, this was like a meeting for the ages. This is a father and son who've been estranged for over a decade, and they're having this life-changing meeting where they're gonna reconcile. And apparently they did, and you don't remember what you spoke about? He just got the feeling that Paul was trying to say as little as possible here.
Yeah.
Like he was afraid that sharing too much might get him in trouble. Frichette continued to question Paul for a bit longer. He asked him about his memory of his father's affair and of his knowledge of his father's finances. Now, Frichette knew from speaking to Agathe that Wilfred, despite being incredibly cheap, did have apparently quite a bit of money saved up.
Yeah.
But Frichette wanted to know if Paul knew about it. Because if Paul thought his dad had cash that theoretically could go to him in the form of an inheritance, well, that was a reason to make amends after all these years, or maybe even reason to commit murder.
So now the plot thickens. Gonna get in with him now, get back in his will, then kill that motherfucker for running off with Rachel's sister.
But Paul said he actually just figured his dad was broke and always had been, because it just sort of explained
the way he lived his life.
Why he was so cheap, because he didn't have much money. That's at least what Paul
That's
thought.
a cover story.
And so he said he didn't expect his dad to leave him anything. This answer made Frichette wish they were doing this interview in person, because over the phone, Frichette couldn't watch Paul's body language as he talked about his father's money. So he couldn't tell if maybe Paul was lying when he said he didn't know that his dad had money. But either way, Paul clearly was not giving him anything particularly useful at this point. And so now Frichette was starting to think that the only person who could tell him if Richard had killed Wilfred and why was Richard himself. The police just had to find him first.
Where is he? I mean, Richard, a bit of a dick, isn't he? Do you know, I always put a dad joke in, and there you go.
2 days later, on the night of January 16th, 1988, Detective Frichette climbed out of his car in front of the Timmins police station and hurried up the steps into the building. After 4 long days in northern Ontario, he was tired of the extreme cold and was just ready to go home. But this murder case just kept getting more complicated. Until recently, Frichette had pretty firmly believed that his primary suspect, Richard Boucher, had been hired to murder Wilfred Goodreau. Wilfred's ex-wife Rachel and his adult son
That's what
Paul
I think.
were the top suspects in terms of, people who might have hired a hitman, since they both had really good reasons to hate Wilfred. And
Who gets the most time there? Like, if you're the conspirators who pay the man to kill him, then do you get more time than the man who's actually killed him? Because if that man doesn't get paid, he doesn't kill him. There's no malice. There's no premeditation specifically for that person. The only premeditation is, give me the money, that's a job, I'll kill him, right? So who gets the most time there for hiring a hitman? The one who actually did it, the hitman, or the conspirators? That's an interesting question in my head that's just popped up.
Hired a hitman, since they both had really good reasons to hate Wilfred. And then also Wilfred's girlfriend, Agathe, had been so calm in her interview.
I just want the heating
on. She was
on.
also on the list as well. And she was also present at the time of the murder.
I bet if it is Agathe, whatever her name is, I bet if it is his current girlfriend, I bet she sat there all night with the fire on, melting on the couch, like with her arms out and everything, like, the heating. I would.
Then, Frichette had gotten access to Wilfred's bank statements, and they'd made him reconsider everything. Wilfred did have a lot of money saved up, that was true, just like Agathe had said. But his bank account had been steadily draining over the past few months. His bank statements showed big withdrawals, spaced out in regular intervals, and Frichette had no idea where the money had gone. Which
Cash
made
machine.
him wonder if Wilfred had been mixed up in something, like drugs or sex workers or gambling.
Whoever's paid the hitman has been taking the money out of the bank and giving it him, like, whatever the limit is a day, like what, about 400 quid or whatever it is. I've been paying him like that regular. Here's the money till the hitman's paid off.
Any one of those could explain the random chunks of money coming out of his account, but more than that, they could theoretically explain Wilfred's hidden connection to Richard, that sort of secret connection that maybe they had. And if those two did know each other, then maybe no one had hired Richard after all. Maybe Richard had killed Wilfred over something that was just between the two of them.
Well, there is
like
that
an
as
unpaid
well.
loan or a deal that went bad. But now, Frichette actually had a chance to find out himself.
Right.
Because that afternoon, the Timmins police had finally tracked Richard down and arrested him. And Frichette had made the 2-hour drive from Kapuskasing to Timmins so he could interview Richard himself.
Yes.
Once inside,
Body
Frichette spoke
language.
to the officer at the station's front desk. And then quickly, they had someone take Frichette back to Richard's holding cell. And when they got there, Frichette found Richard inside the cell, slumped over on the bench, looking exhausted and maybe strung out. His clothes were really dirty, he smelled terrible, and his eyes were completely bloodshot. Frichette entered the cell and sat down across from him, and as aggressively as he could, started laying out the facts. He told Richard that on the morning of the murder, like right after it happened, Wilfred's neighbor had seen Richard leaving the crime scene, and they would be able to pick him out of a lineup for sure. This neighbor also saw Richard's blue pickup truck, which had been found abandoned near a pair of bloody boots that were in Richard's size. Frichette said the lab was still testing the blood, but he was fairly confident that it was going to come back as Wilfred's. Frichette told Richard that with all this evidence, there really was not a jury anywhere in Canada that wouldn't
It's only a
convict
matter
him.
of time.
So if Richard wanted any chance of a lighter sentence, he had
Better
to come
confess.
clean right now. But Richard didn't seem to care at all about Frichette's threats. He just kind of laid there, glaring at the floor and refusing to say a word.
Thing is, though, this guy's been done in the past for loads of different crimes, so he's going to be used to these sort of threats. He's going to know the way the system works. He's going to know the way that the police say things to try and get a rise out you anyway. So he's going to be unfazed because he's probably he's very, very experienced in this field now, isn't he?
A few days later, Frichette was back at the Kapuskasing police station, walking a constable through a script that he had written out. Now, Frichette still didn't actually know for sure if Richard really was the killer, but assuming he was, Frichette didn't know why he did it. He still was sort of torn on the issue.
Right.
Like, did Richard Boucher kill him for personal reasons? Or was Richard hired by somebody else? However, despite being torn between these two ideas, Frichette had sort of landed on a theory, and a way to test it too. His plan was actually really simple. The constable that he was talking to right now was going to call the person Frichette suspected, and the constable was going to try to trick them into incriminating themselves. Now, Frichette couldn't do this himself because the suspect would definitely recognize his voice, so this wouldn't work that way. So
what we're doing here is entrapment.
Suspect would definitely recognize his voice, and so this wouldn't work that way. So once the constable was all prepped, Frichette picked up the phone, dialed the number, and then handed the phone to the constable. And when the suspect answered, the constable just launched into the script that Frichette had given them.
Right.
He told the suspect he was a concerned friend, but he couldn't share his name. He had to be anonymous. And he said he was only calling for one reason. He knew what the suspect had done. What he wanted was just to hear exactly what the suspect had told the police. That was it.
Oh, come on, he ain't gonna fall for that. He ain't gonna fall for that. I don't, yeah, whatever. No, he's not gonna
just
fall
to help
for that.
them.
I wouldn't.
The line went quiet for a second, and everybody just kind of held their breath as they waited to see what happened. But finally, the suspect spoke, and they said they hadn't told the police anything, and that they had enough money to make sure nobody else did either. And when Frichette heard that comment about having enough money here, he knew his theory had been right, because there was a mastermind, somebody behind Wilfred's murder, and they had just given themselves away.
Right, so he's been paid. He's been paid to do it, hasn't he? I've got enough money. So yeah, someone's paid him. One of them, two, three, could be one of the three. It could be Rachel, Agatha, or Paul. But who? Who done? It's like Cluedo, this, isn't it? I got this from the early
Based on witness testimony and recorded evidence, this is what police believe happened to Wilfred Goodreau.
Let's go.
On the afternoon of September 18th, 1987, so this is 4 months before Wilfred was killed, the mastermind behind Wilfred's murder, the eventual mastermind, sat in a diner in Timmins waiting for someone to arrive. They knew that meeting with this person was going to be a very big risk, but they were tired of feeling angry and they wanted Wilfred to pay. Eventually, the mastermind saw a man in his 30s enter the restaurant. And after they made eye contact, this man walked over and slid into the booth across from the mastermind. And then over lunch, the two of them talked through all the details of the mastermind's plan. 4 months later, on the morning of January 12th, 1988, basically in the middle of the night.
At least they gave him Christmas before they killed him, though, didn't they? You know what I mean?
The mastermind was laying awake in bed, literally shaking with nervous anticipation. Their heart was racing because this was it. Tonight was the night their plan was going to be carried out, which meant they were finally going to get the money they deserved out of Wilfred.
Paul.
And so the mastermind, as they were laying there, eventually noticed what time it was,
Paul,
and knew at any moment it was about to start. And sure enough, just then they heard the sound of somebody walking in through the door that led into their house.
He was talking about inheritance. He was talking about Paul wondering if he's going to get the inheritance or not. So it's going to be Paul because Mr Ballen just said about the money. So it's Paul.
Calm as can be, the mastermind simply climbed out of bed, walked into a bedroom closet, and closed the door. And that's because the mastermind was Wilfred's own girlfriend, Agatha Boucher. She'd gotten fed up with how cheap Wilfred was, and she wanted his money.
I was joking. I just said that for a joke. Fuck off. Why am I laughing? Because someone's been killed. She's hiding in a wardrobe. Right, okay. So she didn't want to see it.
She'd gotten fed up with how cheap Wilfred was, and she wanted his money all to herself.
That's funny.
And in fact, she'd already started taking it before he was dead. For months before the murder, she had been the one moving money from Wilfred's account to her own, without him ever noticing. Just sort of ironic for a guy that was so focused on protecting his money. Detective Frichette had honed in on Agat.
Saying that, there was no banking app back then, was there? You know, in 1988, so you couldn't get a phone out and say, how much have I got? You have to go to the bank and request a statement, so I'll go to a cash machine, don't you? So it's not readily available to see how much money you've got in your account, so someone could embezzle your money behind your back, and you never know until you actually go to the bank.
When he learned about the missing money and realized that Agat would have had access to Wilfred's bank accounts. Agat had hired Richard to be her hitman.
Damn.
And she had been introduced to him by her niece, who happened to own one of the bars that Richard provided exotic dancers to. And Agat actually paid Richard the money from Wilfred's own savings.
I was joking about that. Oh my God, I am psychic. I am psychic.
So Wilfred basically paid for his own murder. Agat Boucher and Richard Boucher were both charged with first-degree murder. However, Richard would take his own life before the trial. As for Agat, she was convicted, and she spent 20 years in prison before being released on parole in 2009.
Wow. I tell you what, that's it. The massive ironic irony there is the fact that the guy has funded his own murder without knowing it, and he's known for being tight, never spending money, yet he spent his own money, not by himself, to have himself killed. Jesus Christ. My theory is that I was making a joke. I was making a joke before when I said that she'd have paid him with his own money and stuff like that. But I can't believe that actually came true. Maybe I'm getting too accustomed to Mr Ballen's stories, and I know what's going to happen now. And I know how he shirks around things and paints a picture here and paints a picture there. But then again, he did blag me with that Paul thing about the money that the mastermind was owed, because he did sow that seed before about Paul and his inheritance. But if she's been sweeping his money under his nose for all that time, then obviously she's had him killed for that reason. Just because he wouldn't put the fucking heating on. Anyway, what did you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to check out the original video. Give Mr Ballen a like and subscribe. Follow his channel, etc. If you want to hang around here and subscribe to me too, I would appreciate it. And I'll see you next time.